And to think about the juxtaposition between playing this game and ending up with what happened here, which is a gunshot wound to the head, is just so terrifying and upsetting to hear.
A 21-year-old New Mexico woman gunned down and brutally murdered while playing an innocent game of Pokemon Go. It marked the second time her killer murdered an innocent victim in only a matter of weeks.
I always think it's troubling to hear that an individual had committed one homicide and while they're still out, commits a second one. And I don't know if you can ever make the victim's family whole.
The case dates back to fall of 2019 when 21-year-old Cayla Campos was playing a game of Pokemon Go on Albuquerque's northeast side. It was a game she regularly played with her boyfriend, but the night of October 18th, 2019 would mark her final game. Just before midnight, as she played the popular mobile game near her apartment, Campos and her boyfriend witnessed an armed robbery. 3 teenagers were being held up by 2 other people at gunpoint. When they realized something was off, Campos turned her car around and drove away. But 23-year-old Izaiah Garcia took note and fired his rifle in Campos's direction. The bullet hit her in the head, causing her to lose control of her vehicle. She crashed into a nearby home and was later pronounced dead. Law&Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman says Campos did nothing wrong. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I honestly think about my kids because for years they loved to play Pokemon Go and I used to drive them everywhere. It's such an incredibly innocent game to play, and to think about the juxtaposition between playing this game and ending up with what happened here, which is a gunshot wound to the head, is just so terrifying and upsetting to hear.
Investigators later determined Garcia mistook Campos for a rival criminal who he intended to shoot. Authorities believe it was the same reason Garcia shot and killed 17-year-old Sean Markey, a high school student who was waiting for a ride home from a homecoming party in 2019. His death came just weeks before Campos was murdered. According to prosecutors, he was trying to kill someone else. He thought he was going to kill a different person and then ended up with these innocent victims in the case. Does that make a difference to anything at all, that he was intending to kill specific people?
It does not make a difference whether or not the person who was killed was the intended target in terms of the law. Now, he may think, oh, if I'm saying or my defense is that I didn't intend to kill this person, then somehow that may lessen how the jury views his behavior. But in the eyes of the law, it doesn't make a difference as long as his intent was the same.
In Campos's death, Garcia faced a slew of charges, including murder in the first degree, armed robbery, assault with intent to commit a violent felony, tampering with evidence, child abuse, conspiracy, and depraved mind murder. The one that stood out to me, though, is depraved mind murder. Can you explain what that is? Why might prosecutors charge someone with that?
So many times when an individual is charged with murder, they're charged on several theories. One would be an intentional murder, meaning you intended to kill an individual. And sometimes there's something called depraved. That is where your behavior is so wanton, so reckless, so disregarding the life of another human being that the behavior amounts to murder. And so that can be sometimes why they add it. There's one other wrinkle to this is there was an argument in this case that the person he thought he was killing was somebody else and it ended up being her. So that might just be another reason why they added that depraved indifference charge.
While Campos's murder happened in late 2019, Garcia was just convicted in this case on February 29th of this year, about 4.5 years after the crime. And this specific incident happened back in 2019. Is there any reason why it would have taken until 2024 for a conviction?
So a great question with not easy answers. Sometimes it takes a while to make an arrest. Sometimes because the other case was going as well, there might be issues in terms of when the case can start. We never know if it's the defense that's slowing things down or the prosecution that's slowing things down. It's not unusual, particularly for a murder case, for it to take some time, although this is quite a lot of delays in terms of going forward.
It's also possible that Campos's case was delayed because Garcia was first tried for Markey's murder. Garcia was convicted in that case in August 2021 and sentenced to life in prison. And we've talked a lot about that other case simply because he was already convicted of murder and now he's convicted for a second separate murder. And I've seen from prosecutors there's no sentencing yet for Cayla's case, but prosecutors say that they plan to have these two sentences consecutively. Does that really matter in this case, whether the sentences are consecutive or concurrent, being that he will spend the rest of his life behind bars?
It doesn't matter necessarily if it's consecutive or concurrent, with some exceptions. One is, let's suppose he appeals one of the cases and he's successful. So that could be one factor in terms of wanting consecutive versus concurrent. The other thing is, keep in mind, the victim's family wants to know that they're getting justice for their family member specifically. And so they want him to be held separately responsible in terms of his punishment than his prior homicide.
So far, a sentencing date has not been scheduled for Garcia in the case of Cayla Campos, but Rendleman says it will likely happen sooner rather than later.
It's not usual that an individual, after they're convicted, that there's a long delay with sentencing. He's staying in regardless. I assume that either he's remanded on or on such excessive bail that he can't make it. And he's also in on the other case. So my expectation is that the sentencing will be coming along quite quickly.
As for what's next in Garcia's case, it's possible an appeal could be on the way. What do you think would go into an appeal? Is it possible that he's already looking into one? What would the next steps there be?
Anytime an individual is convicted for a felony such as this, there's going to be an automatic appeal. As to what the nature of that is, one doesn't know. There was an argument during the case that there was a rush to judgment. And so there might be arguments in regards to the strength and weaknesses of the case. There's always questions about whether the defense was effective, whether there's prosecutorial misconduct. Not that there was, but that doesn't mean that the defense isn't going to make arguments that the prosecution provided evidence to the jury that they shouldn't have. And so I think anytime you do appeal, you want to cover all your bases. And so that if there is one area that the appeal can stick on, that's what you're going to use to try to get your client off.
And in this case, in your opinion, Julie, do you think that justice was served?
Yes, I think justice was served. The person who is responsible was convicted for this crime. I always think it's troubling to hear that an individual had committed one homicide and while they're still out, commits a second one. And I don't know if you can ever make the victim's family whole. So the prosecution's job is just to give them something to allow them to say, at least this person will not be on the street to do it again.
Among all this, Garcia also faces additional charges for a separate attempted murder. He was accused of attacking a fellow inmate while serving time at the Metropolitan Detention Center.
So there is a video of him walking by an individual who he believes either murdered or attacked someone close to him. And he takes a plastic shiv, like a broken piece of plastic, and just stabs him, I think like 20 something times. He lived, the whole thing is caught on camera.
Investigators say Garcia attacked 21-year-old Christopher Byers with a shiv created from a mop or broom handle. Byers allegedly killed Garcia's half-brother, 16-year-old Thomas Nunn, in January 2022. Garcia now faces a charge of attempted murder in that case, but a trial date has not yet been set. As for what happened in the case of Cayla Campos, Rendleman says others should be vigilant when they're out at night, but not overly concerned. Is this something that people should be keeping in mind when they're doing something like playing Pokemon Go or going on their nightly walks or runs, things like that?
I don't know that this means that people need to change what they're doing. We always have to be on high alert when we're out late at night. But I would expect that this is not anything that one should worry about.
In the case of Campos's murder, Garcia faces life in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 30 years. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.